Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and our mission is to bring you interviews with leaders in the environmental industry with the goal of providing you with information about industry trends, climate change, renewable and future energies, circular economy, regulatory topics, digital technologies, and service providers that are transforming the industry. So today's guests are Deb Morrison and Tom Bowman, recent authors of the Empowering Climate Action in the United States book from the Resetting Our Future book series. And so we're glad to have them come on. And how you guys doing?
Doing great. Thanks.
Doing
Great
well.
to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm excited to have the show today with you. Tom, you're a repeat guest here. I'm really excited to have you back because I think our last episode was fantastic and had a lot of really good responses from it. So I'm excited.
Great. Well, it's great to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we jump in, could you kind of both tell us a little bit about a little bit about yourself, how you ended up collaborating on this new book from the Resetting Our Future book series, and just explain how that occurred. And we'll let ladies go first. Deb, why don't you get started, and Tom, you can come second.
Perfect. I think of it as the prettiest goes first. So
there you
go. That's good. I am a learning scientist at the University of Washington, and I have come from a rural community in Canada and worked climate change in a number of different directions as an ecologist in forestry, as an educator, and then got really concerned, honestly, about how 20 years of work in sort of thinking about climate action and doing different things in research just wasn't actually amounting to anything in the world, that not at the rate that I think it needs to be happening and that the science really tells us it should be happening. And also at the disconnect of what actions were being suggested by government and what communities that I am familiar with needed and wanted. And so I got a PhD in learning sciences and started exploring that and spent the last decade really deeply in that work. And I'll let Tom say a little bit more maybe about himself, and then we can say how we ended up in the same book writing project together last year.
Sure. So the prettiest did get to go first. I'm a communication practitioner and an entrepreneur. So I came at this and really learned climate science because I was doing exhibit design for museums, and I also did commercial marketing and what's called social marketing. And like Deb, I was sort of awakened to the urgency of accelerating the pace of public engagement, and that became sort of a driving question. I sold my design firm to my employees and sort of set off as a consultant, working on strategic communication projects for various clients, federal agencies and others. And with social scientists, always kind of asking the question, how do we turn the key? What can we push on in our culture that will give us enough leverage to accelerate the pace of public action and create a sense of public kind of determination and empowerment?
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely.
Yeah, and you guys have, had this sense of urgency of trying to, really try to get something done. And you guys, we're going to talk about it and dig into deep here, why and how you guys started this process. But so the book is written recently, just recently was released. It's broken down to 6 chapters. And with the first 3 chapters, kind of giving the reader an understanding of how the group coalesced and brought the group of these climate champions, should I say, together to form this group. And then the meat of the book and that I found was in chapter 4. That's like where you really got the meat and potatoes of what you guys were really trying to accomplish with this this group. And then the last 2 chapters, 5 and 6, were really kind of like talking, showcasing some of the contributors, and then maybe what the future looks like. And so I highly recommend this book for the readers and the listeners. I'm sorry, the listeners here on the podcast, because it's a quick read. It's about 100 pages long. You can knock it out in the weekend, like I did, and then you can talk. You get a lot of good information about the climate initiatives here. And so let's talk about this group of interested parties that formed the action for climate empowerment in that community there. Talk about that a little bit, if you could.
Yeah, so there's been decades and decades worth of work in this area, and a lot of different convenings over time, which I think one of the appendices in the book actually talks about some of that history that all this effort's built on. But really in the last year and a half, we could see things coming to a head where there's the potential for a different federal government, possibly for possibly having climate policies really start to take a big leap forward. And so thinking about that and just thinking about the urgency and some of the requirements to meet the Paris Agreement, goals, we started to really think about what could we do more? And so we coalesced around a number of different people from really different backgrounds and professional contexts, and coalesced a group that we call, I think, the coordinating team is how we're referring to ourselves. Okay. And it's just sort of an interim measure until we get a more structured sort of ACE working team in place, or some kind of entity in place that will work it. But in the interim, what we did is we actually tried to find a process that could actually listen to communities. And then Tom and I were part of the writing team for that effort. And so we attended all the sessions and listened, and a huge group of facilitators and moderators. And,
it sounds like it was like a backroom, private, secret group of people that came together.
No.
How did this happen? Because I just first I heard about it, and so I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting. How'd this work?
Well,
go ahead,
so sure. So the foundation for this is the need that Deb described, but there is a structure for it which comes out of the UNFCCC international treaty, which is, and one of its offspring is the Paris Climate Agreement, which calls on nations to create national strategies to inform and empower their publics to be engaged in climate solutions.
Right.
And so building upon that, we all recognize that because we're not the federal government of the United States, we can't create the national strategy. That's an official act of the United States. But we realized we could push that process forward by creating what we call the strategic planning framework for the United States. And so this group of people came voluntarily, and they came together through a whole series of network relationships and invitations, and invitations that begat other, subsequent invitations. And so it was really a volunteer effort based on relationships and trust. We worked really hard to get a diverse group of participants in terms of their positions in society, age, race, gender, profession, all of those. We tried to create as much of a cross section as we could, recognizing that people who chose to come were people who really care about this issue and who are working and therefore bring a lot of experience and knowledge together. So it wasn't closed, it was the biggest tent that a group of volunteers could create. And it turned out to be a remarkably interesting, big, and really high quality group of people.
So how many sessions were you guys involved with to kind of develop this framework? Because it sounds like there was quite a few meetings, and I'm assuming it was mostly virtual. Is that right?
It was all virtual, which actually in the long run turned out to be a good thing, I think, because we had more participation from folks who wouldn't have had the funding to travel, because we didn't have funding for this. We had a small seed grant from the Spencer Foundation that allowed us to support people who didn't have the capacity to volunteer their time, but everybody else volunteered their time. And so I think in dialogues there was 5 or 6, I think, with the closing dialogues. And then there was a number of planning meetings, almost weekly, I would say, maybe sometimes twice a week, planning meetings leading up to it from all the way back, December last, a year before.
Yeah, and those dialogues were something really transformational, I think, for the people who participated. I found them to be so, because the idea was that you leave your logo at the door. right?
Mhm.
You leave your job title, your profession at the door, and you come together as equals with people who come from other professional silos and very different life circumstances than you come from. And the dialogues were structured so that it wasn't just a free-for-all conversation. It was purposeful conversation. But it was conversations in which everybody was respected, equal, and all of their inputs were gathered. And so chapter 4 of the book, the centerpiece that Deb and I were the writing team for, is the report of this whole process. It's called
Mhm.
an ACE Strategic Planning Framework for the United States. And that's a standalone report. It's available for free online, but our publisher approached us about creating a book out of it and to provide additional context, because books move through the world quite differently than online reports do. They carry a certain kind of weight that online reports don't. And it
Mhm.
gave us a chance to invite commentaries, which is chapter 5, from a really diverse group of climate leaders who talk about the importance of this ACE process going forward for the country.
So, okay, so the Paris Agreement has this ACE planning framework that needs to be kind of established for countries that are part of the agreement, right?
Mhm.
And essentially, the United States, really nobody actually, it's not just the United States. Nobody's really established an ACE group yet to officially say, here's our strategic plan for climate change. Is that accurate to say? I think that's kind
It's
of the way I read
shifting.
it. Is it
It's
shifting now?
shifting now. So there are 8 or 9 countries who have engaged in a national planning process. The US is the first high emitting country to do this work, or hopefully to engage in this work more as a national strategy.
Push it
Um,
forward.
but folks like Austria, I would say, is like the closest comparative country in terms of a Western nation,
Uh-huh.
has engaged in that. And the ACE focal point in that country has been very active and vocal in the international stage about that work.
Well, so basically we have a bunch of concerned citizens, right?
Mhm.
Climate, champions who are really concerned, that realize that the United States hasn't really developed a formal group yet to really address this
Mhm.
requirement to be part of the Paris Agreement. And since the last administration kind of pulled us out, now we're back in. Now there's this urgency to actually, like, let's get this thing going. And you guys have essentially developed a playbook for the new administration, right? To come in and just say, let's start from here and pick it up from here and make it where it needs to be.
Yes. We very
Kinda.
intentionally were creating a playbook for a piece of it. I mean,
Right.
there are policies that they're pursuing. The investment in green infrastructure, for example, is something that the federal government is going to try to do legislatively,
Mhm.
regardless of what we do. But the perspective that our work takes is that the greatest capacity for rapid transformation that's equitable and just lives in communities.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It lives in the context where people live,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so a strategy that empowers bottom-up action, where people come together, learn to understand their own concerns and make choices for their own communities about their own future, is a very different model than an external top-down
Mhm.
set of requirements that everybody has to adapt to. And we're not saying that there's no place for that, but Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, is kind of the place where the bottom up and the top down can meet.
Meet,
So there
yeah.
can be a top down strategy for empowering communities
Mhm.
and for aligning the work of educators and activists and strategic communicators and health professionals and
Mhm.
businesses and active community activist groups and city governments and state governments. The idea is to get everybody aligned so that the collective impact is much greater, but it's not about imposing a particular methodology over everybody. It's about creating the conditions that allow people to flourish where they
Mm.
live.
And I think another important point to build off that is that the goal of this is really to leverage the network. So while we were all individuals coming into this, mostly all on our volunteer time, we also represent organizations that have been working in this space for decades. And
Mhm.
so, like, how are we bringing not only our own organization, but all of those that we've worked with and have relationships with over the years that then we can bring those people into relationship with new people that are part of this growing ACE community, in ways that might be like we haven't thought of, nobody's thought of before, that we can innovate and do new things and learn new things from each other. And maybe bridge some of the big gaps that we see that the media sort of portrays, like, rural America versus, the green liberals. Like there is ways that we can bridge these boundaries when we face each other, person to person.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really saying, is that we need to work in community, in relationship with each other, and have decisions like more locally made, but informed by all these other networks that we can get people in touch with.
Yeah, when I look at this, I go, hey, this climate issue is everybody's issue. It's not,
It is.
a red or
Yeah.
a red or blue issue, or
No,
or
it's not.
libertarian issue. It's everybody's issue, right?
And Sean, like, it's funny because I actually dug into that about the partisanship related issues, and it was so interesting because, in 2000, the before 2000, there were a lot of Green Republicans. And so it's the way it's been polarized in the last 20 years. And we have got to stop that if we're going to actually have sustainable communities.
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Well, so when we talk about the process you guys went through to really kind of like bring in all the inputs, because there's a lot of inputs, you were bringing in all kinds of people from different, walks of life. How important was it to get involved the Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the I guess you call it the BitCo, category of individuals that can really help assimilate them into this whole community input? I mean, this process. How did you do that, and how important was it to the process?
I think it was pretty critical, in terms of ensuring that there is space and like we don't give people agency, we just open up space for them to exhibit. And so like that was really needed, because especially in the climate debate at the national level for the last couple decades, feels like, and there has been a real disconnect between what communities who are marginalized and who are often feeling the strongest impacts of climate change right now, for them to be able to actually have a voice in what decisions are getting made and what they need. That has been really challenging. And I would say, like, this issue is often portrayed as it's for BIPOC communities, or, and only for them. It's not. Like, the amount I've personally learned by working with different Black, Indigenous, people of color is unbelievable. And like, it broadens everyone's perspective and innovations that can go on in any location.
I would imagine you found that they have the same concerns that, other people have, right? I mean, they're just maybe more affected in certain ways because maybe where they live is more impacted.
I'd say they're more resilient right now because they've lived in a longer state of oppression where they've had to deal with less. And so they're much more resilient and innovative right now. And, it's both a gift and a weight that they bear.
And we should be really clear, the mentality that you hear from the national discussion often is that the power elites are going to provide a solution for the rest of us. It's almost like, we're children and they're the adults, right? And and we've all been, as we talked about the other book, there's this impression that climate change is so complicated that only technical elites can deal with it and the rest of us can't. And so it creates this false narrative that there's wisdom, experience, and knowledge at the top, and there's ignorance, confusion, and apathy at the bottom. And when you create real face-to-face dialogue with people from these communities who have been shoved to the sides and treated as if they know nothing, what you discover is this incredible richness of experience, knowledge, and wisdom that is invaluable to their future. And collectively, it's invaluable to all of ours, but it becomes really clear that that's not the property of the federal government to go out and mine and extract for the purposes of others, right? It establishes a real respect for honest relationship and collective problem solving that is respectful. And in a way, that's the giant gift of ACE. Not only does it give us our best shot at creating a future that's with the most stable climate we can create, but it also transforms our sense of power relationships and it helps us overcome these really destructive impressions and thoughts that we have about the relationships between different segments of our society.
And the fears that we have related to that, they're just not founded when you start working with people as people and like really working across these boundaries that we see socially.
Yeah, breaking down, like you said, leave your logo at the door. You're breaking that down. You're just, hey, we're all red-blooded Americans, or or people. So we all have the same needs to survive and things like that. So we need to we have the same interests. So, well, let's dive into a little bit about some of the discoveries that you guys talked about. So in chapter 2, you had discoveries and assumptions. Talk about some of the assumptions that emerged from the ACE strategic planning framework conversations, if you could.
Sure. One of them is that this group is a group that accepts the reality of climate science, that climate change is real and that it's urgent. And we might as well name that outright, because you're not going to easily attract climate deniers into a conversation like this.
Yeah.
Right. Deb, do you want to, don't let me just dominate this.
No, it's okay. I won't. And the idea that justice itself is integral to being able to have a sustainable climate future. Because if we can't solve our justice issues as we start to solve our climate issues, we're always going to have this persistent challenge of economy and just deep-seated ways of seeing the world that are going to be really problematic. And so getting at justice at the same time as we're working towards solving climate change actually may be the way that we solve climate change. So because we can hear and see different perspectives that we wouldn't otherwise be open to if we didn't open ourselves to relationships with people that have been historically and are currently oppressed. So that's really a key piece. And sort of parallel to that and with that is the idea of who's making decision for whom and who's designing. So the idea that we actually have to have really some big shifts actually in how we decide who's at the table and who gets to decide, what a solution looks like for a given community.
Yeah, I mean, are there any other assumptions that kind of popped up? They were like, I didn't anticipate that one being, kind of a prevailing, idea or issue.
I think that the idea that the richness of knowledge and innovation at the community level is kind of surprising when you actually confront it. And the reason I say that is because I've been a small business owner and my innovations are treated like a curiosity, a little idiosyncrasy that doesn't mean much, right? And it's an anecdote. And when you think about innovations in Orlando, Florida, or in Greensburg, Kansas, you think that they're anecdotal and they don't amount to anything. But when you get people together, you discover that when you start sharing and pooling, there is enormous capacity there that is in many ways our greatest asset, and yet it's an asset we hardly ever acknowledge. So
it's been siloed, so to speak, in its little way of that those regions or those pockets of knowledge are being, deploying those solutions, but they're not getting out, right?
That's right.
And I think that there's another assumption in trying with that one is the idea of that we have responsibility to place, right? People live in communities and are very connected to their communities. Not everywhere, because there are some people that are more mobile and disconnected, but many people live in places where they have a deep connection to their environment and to the other people who live there. And that kind of knowledge that's place connected, I've often thought, like Tom just said, I've often thought of that to be kind of unique and, eclectic. But it turns out that there's a commonality of that idea that we have place connected knowledge and that we all value that place connected knowledge. and that when somebody comes in from the outside, they're trying to put a general solution on us, and we push back on it because we're like, no, this is
You
our
don't know,
place.
you don't know our
Yeah,
environment. Get away.
that's right.
Go somewhere else.
And that's a truth that I think was really important for everybody to feel and recognize that it comes from different histories, from different trajectories of where we live or who we are. But many, many people in the effort, I think, felt that and saw that.
Yeah, and there was one, I just want to name one of the indigenous leaders who was part of this process, observed, in fact, that it's not true that everybody wants to be brought into the market economy. A lot of indigenous communities prefer not to be brought into the market economy, and that means that solutions that are driving for economic growth in the way we normally think of it
Doesn't
are
fit their
inappropriate in those communities, right? And there's no reason that those communities should be forced to change their way of life.
Their worldview is different in that perspective, and they want something different. They don't want, what this economic approach is. So yeah, it makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, okay. And so in chapter 3, you guys get into engaging with additional dialogue and with partners. Who were some of the communities and partners that you were focused on talking with, and who were some of the parties that may have been left out in this whole ACE engagement? Because I'm sure there was a few, right?
Yeah, our networks only reached so far in
And
the sort of
time and
current,
effort,
the
right?
time and lack of resources are normal things. And I think this is the interesting thing about this approach is it's a constantly evolving and expanding approach. So like we touched on some of the initial sort of easy to reach organizations that we had already existing relationships with, and we went out from them and like brainstormed. So many organizations were, different Indigenous or Black or people of color organizations that we wanted to try and connect with and make sure that they're heard in this process. We looked for groups that were really involved in ACE-like work. So folks involved in outreach centers, lots of different people involved in informal education or education spaces. So a lot of that. There were definitely areas that we weren't as strong with. We did have some connections in business, but we didn't go down that rabbit hole as deeply as we should and could potentially. And the same for, I would say, the scientific community. We had many scientists involved, but there's a whole nother area that we could expand into that community more. And then, of course, more broadly across rural networks. We did have a lot of people involved who lived in rural settings, but not necessarily that represented rural organizations per se. So I think that is something that would be really helpful to dig more into. Like things like the 4-H clubs, and like that kind of thing would be really great.
Extension offices and places, people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe some of the farming folks too, I would say.
Farm communities would be big because they're caretakers, conservation groups as well. Like what about, the Isaac Walton League and
we
people
had
like that,
some
right?
of those. Yeah, we had some of those groups involved, and more since have like come into our network in different ways. Biodiversity and land conservation efforts.
Yeah, one comes to mind is like the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. They're kind of a overall kind of bigger nonprofit that a lot of the smaller nonprofits or other nonprofits, kind of umbrella under, and Trout Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, those
right.
different, those
I actually
things.
just saw something about Ducks Unlimited, and I was explaining it to my daughter, and I'm like, right, like. There's vested interest in these different spaces that we need to make sure that we're connecting with and leveraging. But again, we're really trying to figure out in all of those groups, like, what is it about it that will help around that kind of education, outreach, and all those organizations do some piece of it. So who in that big organization is doing that piece that we need to connect to? Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, I mean, that's a lot of work. Let's be honest, right? You guys, that's a full-time job. You could spend years doing this.
Group of people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it could take this could be like a whole department. Just all we do is try to gather information from these types of, people and entities, to form and create this strategy as best it can. Yeah. So that's great. Well, let's get into chapter 4, because chapter 4 seemed to me like that was, it was a big one. And I mean,
Hmm.
it's the meat of the book, really, and it really has a lot of segments. I thought they were really good. And so, you know, uh, it lays out the planning strategic framework that the ACE
Hmm.
community developed, and that, the United States government, they could use it if right away. Sounds like, I mean, or at least parts of it, right? As part of the national focal point for their climate action enforcement, the ACE group. So tell me about, as the Biden administration had any response to this document yet?
We had people involved in these dialogues from federal agencies.
Okay.
And we are hopeful that the Biden administration will pull the trigger on the first official act as far as the Paris Treaty goes, which is to designate a person as the national focal point for Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE.
Uh-huh.
That's an official act, and that person has responsibility for two things. They're kind of an hourglass between the federal, the subnational and the international
Mhm.
spheres. So their job is to report to the UNFCCC Paris Agreement process on progress in the United States, and collaborate across the federal government to help the federal government implement the strategy across the federal agencies and so forth. But they are also the focal point for the government's interactions with civil society, with all these networks that Deb's been describing and you've been talking about, Sean. Um, and we are hopeful that they will soon be designating someone for that role. And if
Hmm.
they do, that person's job description is going to include creating a national strategy. So that's why this framework is so timely, because if that happens, it provides a really important structure.
For
And
some
that,
reason, this
go
name's
ahead.
coming to my mind, Tom. John Kerry. Didn't they just
Hmm.
appoint him like the global ambassador for climate or something like that? I mean, wouldn't
Climate
that be
envoy.
it,
I think he is the climate envoy
Yes.
for the
or
United
something
States.
like that? Yeah, right.
Mhm. Yeah, Kerry actually has been supportive. He spoke in Madrid at the COP25 meeting last year, around in the ACE dialogue, so the Action for Climate Empowerment dialogue. And he is like a very well-versed statesman on the whole range of climate issues. But this ACE piece is one article of the entire Paris Agreement. And so there would be somebody, an ACE focal point inside the US government, that's designated and tasked with this particular article of the Paris Agreement. And that
Gotcha.
has yet to happen, but we're hopeful that it will be imminent.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, Tom, there, but it just
Well,
just the name.
no, please. But I would say that it speaks to one of the things that we wrote about in the framework, which is every country has a different set of national circumstances. And so there's a section of the report that describes the national circumstances in the United States. And it says that we are a very pluralistic society with different
Mhm.
values frames, different language that we use, different hopes and ambitions. But we are also a society that has multiple different layers of jurisdiction for decision making, right? And
Hmm.
because of that, um, that means that the ACE work we do is inherently not top down. It really has
Yeah,
to work at every level of organization and decision making in the country, from organizations to municipalities to regional governments, state governments, tribal governments. And it isn't only government, right? It's businesses,
Mhm.
it's community groups, it's homeowners associations, it's
sure.
households, it's everything. So so we really have to embrace, I think, for a strategy to work in the United States, this plurality of decision-making
Mhm.
structures, and find ways to influence all of those structures. And that's really what the recommendations in the framework document speak to, that real diversity of authorities and interests and capacities.
Mhm.
That's
And
why there are so
really,
many.
Yeah,
yeah, and really trying to get people to start thinking, like, to just move beyond the debate about climate change is happening, climate change isn't happening. And like, I'm so done with that debate. Like, what we're really talking about is what solutions do you want to put on the table? And how do you want to like think and work toward that as a community? You have a voice in it, or you can step back and say you don't even want to engage in the conversation. So,
yeah.
and then others will come in and make those decisions for you. So like this is a process that hopefully will really allow us to like have communities really deeply engaged in their own work and defining solutions that work for them.
So we need the Biden administration to appoint the national focal point is the
Yeah.
first thing. That's going to kind of like jumpstart this whole process.
That will definitely help.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, I mean, they got to, chart the course for the strategic plan. However, they've got this little playbook in their back pocket they can start with, at least,
Mhm.
get them started. It's not probably the end all be all, but it's definitely going to be like a good starting point, right? They don't have to like start
Yeah.
from scratch.
Yeah, and as we wrote, I think we let the book go in December 1st, I think it was. And since December 1st, there actually has been a significant amount of work done to further this kind of effort, to extend the coalitions of networks, to continue briefing different policymakers, doing a whole bunch of work, coalition building in different ways. And so that goes on outside of the federal government, and the community-based entity that is the ACE team continues to work toward this effort and expand and do that work. So the question is, will the federal government actually enable and fund the effort more deeply? And because right now it's still all being done as a volunteer basis, and not just the federal government. I would actually also say philanthropic organizations need to dig in and understand that this kind of backbone funding for coordinating this kind of effort, it's a thing that also needs to be funded.
Yeah, no, I caught that in the book.
Yeah.
I read that, and when it was brought up, I was like, well, that's a good point. And Deb, you bring up a great point, because there's a lot of work, a lot of energy that goes into this, and you don't want to just get it going and all of a sudden, hey, we're tapped out. We got to stop because we have a day job, or we got to eat, we got to pay bills. It's
Exactly.
Like, and who can be involved is really dependent on who has the privilege to be able to eat still and do this, right? And that's not the way we want to be thinking about equity in this. So we need it funded.
Yeah.
There's also, just imagine though, also what this might mean to philanthropic organizations who are investing millions of dollars every year in various ACE-related activities that are not aligned strategically. Everybody's making investments according to their own mission, their own proclivities, their own assumptions about nature of change, their own relationships that they have. And so it's a fragmentary, scattershot approach. And if we can marshal the resources to convene them and present what an ACE strategy offers and the insights that came pouring in from grantees, small organizations that just don't have the technical capacity or the time to compete for grants, or organizations that are doing good work that can get funding for pilot projects, but they can never get funding to take them to scale, or organizations that are that do project-based grants, and they're great and they're successful, but there's no infrastructure funding to carry them over until the next grant kicks in to pay the rent and pay the salaries and keep people engaged. So you find all these talented people with lots of experience who move in and out of climate work because they engage when they can find funding, and they go do something else when they can't. And so
not
consistently
consistently keeping it going though,
right? And so imagine the benefit to philanthropic organizations to say, hey, we can spend our dollars more wisely and more effectively and achieve our own goals.
So what we really need is Bill Gates to, Bill and Melinda really kind of fund a big component of this.
I mean, it would honestly be amazing. It would be amazing. And I've been involved with another type of grant, this coherence around this, that has been funded eclectically out of different NSF budgets. And actually by the Gates Foundation too, they've funded pieces of it. And those type of coherent, system-wide kind of efforts are what is needed here, but on a times 100 scale, because we're talking about the whole nation, all across. But it is really possible, and there are models of how to do that, and we have shown that it can go forward, and it would just be so much more efficient. I can see a time when people in a community are looking for interns, and they're working with youth, and they're working in doing some kind of reclamation activity, and who knows, maybe for a shellfish industry out on the West Coast here. And it's all related. Businesses involved, federal government's involved, local governments, youth are involved. And all of that is working together. And those connections are just not being made. People are too siloed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a lot of money from private institutions or
Mhm,
philanthropic institutions, giving money away to other nonprofits. I mean, I think the Nature
mhm.
Conservancy, didn't they just get like a $300 million grant from, oh, geez, who was it? I mean, it was huge. It was like, massive.
Well, Bezos gave like 100 million away to different
Yeah.
organizations,
Right.
and it was just kind of like drop, drop,
Yeah.
drop, you know?
Right. Well, let's maybe we need to
Mhm,
raise elevate the program here a little bit,
mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's what we're doing. So what we're doing today. Let's see. Let's
It's
keep it
about
going.
it's the old raise our game
Yeah,
motto,
and
let's raise
honest
our game.
totally, and, the biggest challenge I think that we face with ACE is when people start talking about climate empowerment, they immediately only think about youth, and they
Uh,
immediately think about education,
uh-huh.
and that is one of 6 components of ACE.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of those because
Yeah.
those we got 6 attributes to talk about.
Mhm.
But before we do, what does the United States? Where does the United States stand on climate change? Where do
We're
you think
back in
that
the
happens?
Paris Agreement.
Tom,
We're back in the Paris Agreement. I have to say, as a scientist, as an educator, and a learning scientist, I am so happy we are back in the Paris Agreement, because we're trying to do something about it. And the
right.
U.S. is a major emitting country, and we
Yeah.
can sway the world. We have clout that we can leverage politically. It's been damaged in the last few years, but it can actually be sway others. And I think that that's something to be proud of, but we have to work for it if we're going to be proud
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Tom, what's your thoughts there?
I would echo that, and I'd also say that the fact um, that President Biden named John Kerry this climate envoy and put him on the Security Council, made him
Mhm,
a cabinet member,
mhm,
and appointed Gina McCarthy the head of a new White House office on domestic climate policy, and re-entered the Paris Agreement on day one of his administration sends enormous signals to the world and to our own people and our own economy that this is a high priority. Now the question is, how do you do it, right? How do you
Mhm.
engage? I live in California, which has the most aggressive economy-wide climate requirements in the
And
United
other
States,
environmental
right?
regulations too.
Sure, and we and our voters overwhelmingly defend those year after year after year at the ballot box. We want to clean up our air and water. We like our environment, and uh, and we are making rapid progress, but it's getting harder. We've picked the low-hanging fruit in California. And so California has not done yet a good job with ACE, but
mhm.
they have demonstrated that you can approach this in an economy-wide way and make progress, right? And California itself is the fifth largest economy in the world. So that's only one more metric that says there's a lot of potential here. And the Biden administration clearly recognizes it. And so our hope is that they'll put an ACE national focal point in place, and that this particular aspect of climate work will start to generate momentum within the federal government and within the broader society.
I
And I
also
think
feel.
I think
I was, Go
I
ahead,
think I
Deb.
think there's one other thing that I have to name, because America is, or the United States is, an incredibly diverse country. Like, in terms of its people, it's incredibly diverse. And because of that, we have these histories of oppression, we have these histories of differential power. But what we also have is we have understandings of what it means to engage in justice work. We know things, we've learned things
Mhm.
about what it means to engage in climate justice work, things that are different in other places in the world, right? And we actually have a lot to say to the international community about what climate justice could be, like what pathways like that could look like.
No, that's great. I mean, I do see and feel that there is also a more societal awareness,
Mhm,
when it comes to
Mhm.
climate change. Like, you know what? No, this is really starting to become more of a,
mhm,
something to take serious.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
starting to become a sense of, I mean, urgency maybe, but at least a sense of awareness where we need to
Yeah.
do something and be more sustainable. I mean, think about all the companies in our country now that are committing to
mhm.
zero net carbon by
Yeah,
2035. I mean, that's huge. That's
Yeah,
never. I mean,
business is always like leading the way around like what things
yeah.
can change because it's market forces are forcing it. So
And we're seeing now financial institutions actually requiring these companies to actually, disclose their sustainability, commitments,
Hmm.
and as
Hmm.
part of investment strategies. People are like, I only want to invest in people that
Mhm,
are, have
mhm,
these focused goals that line up with, the individual that's actually buying, and so this is really, I think there's been a huge shift
mhm.
personally.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, it's been an enormous shift in the last decade. Like it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
And it's the kind of shift that gathers momentum. And
Mhm,
as people start to, there's a myth in in a lot of the social change work that says we have to change minds and then people's behavior
mhm.
will change. It doesn't always work that way.
No.
Changing
Right.
people's behavior changes their understandings, changes
Mhm,
their perceptions, changes their attitudes also.
mhm,
And it works both ways. And so as we start to see benefit, as we start to see cleaner skies and more empowerment and better social capital, as they say, is
mhm,
a fancy
Mhm.
word for better relationships between people. Um, these kinds of things sort of become our new social norms and people expect it and we move faster and faster. At least
mhm,
that's the great hope.
Yeah, no,
mhm.
I'd agree. Well, so you touched a little bit on these attributes, Deb. Let's go into some of those real quick. And we've got you outlined 6 of them in the chapter in the book there. Talk about some of those and what are they? How are we using those to address climate crisis?
Yeah. So the 6 attributes are education, training. Sorry, so I'm gonna forget them now, Tom. Um,
Training.
They'll help you.
Education, training, public awareness, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation. I'm like, yeah, I live and breathe these things, and so I can't
Yeah,
remember them sometimes.
there you go. Sorry.
Yeah. So, and the language is language that's from the UN. It's from the actual original UNFCCC, and in
Hmm.
like 1992, I think it was.
Hmm.
And so you have to consider that, right? So what we talk about is education and training now. Education itself actually is unpacked to include education in community, education in schools, outreach kind of by scientific organizations. All of that is sort of in the education to some degree. And then training is professional, managerial, vocational training, like on the job, in institutes, whatever, in all different locations. So that can be quite broad as well. My brother's an iron worker, and I often think about all the work he does that is training work, that's like
Hmm.
courses and recertifications. And all of that is now actually
Hmm.
starting to be woven in with climate change learning. Um, and then public access to information is really more about like, not necessarily just the website version anymore. And Tom's better to talk about all the comm related things because he's the communications specialist. I'm more on the education and training side. So you want to do all
Well,
the
yeah. Well, so, it's easy to think of public access to information meaning data sets,
Mhm,
summaries, animations that you would find, for example, on NOAA's website, climate.gov, and places like that. But it's
Hmm.
also the knowledge that's held by businesses, the
mhm,
knowledge that's held by within communities. It's basically to say, let's create transparent access to all that we're learning about climate change, about our circumstances where we live, and
Right.
critically important, about the solutions. There's a
mhm.
big push in this framework that says education about the climate system isn't enough. We need education about climate solutions. We need
I want to
education
create
about
disparate.
environmental justice and climate justice. And
Hmm.
it's about every subject in school and it's lifelong learning. Um, so it's about behavioral change on this side of the equation too. The cool thing about these things and the way we approached it, there are 6, right? But we clumped dialogues together with titles that
Mhm,
drew people from different elements, different professional silos. So otherwise, you'd see all the educators going to the education one, and all the communicators going to the public access to information one,
Right.
and they'd stay in their silos, and we wouldn't gain the cross fertilization that happened. So we did one about decision making and transformational decision making in communities. That attracts everybody, right?
Sure.
And that's the
Yeah.
magic of this, is that you discover that breaking out of your silo is where the action is.
mhm,
No, that's
mhm,
great. I mean, and just thinking, the way of these attributes. I mean, I think the goal is to I guess, create a daily worldview
Mhm.
of an individual, which is basically, hey, I got to do things that are sustainable, right? That have a positive impact, a green impact on everything, every decision I make, whether that's, buying, a product versus, doing an activity versus,
Mhm.
recycling as much as I can. I mean, everything you're doing is within the lens of sustainability, climate reduction, things like that. I mean, that mental process is going to have to be constantly reinforced through all these processes you're kind of going through with these attributes, I'm assuming.
And it's also going into this space of understanding that like we live at different scales, right? Like I'm an individual, I'm a mother, I'm a runner, so like all of those things are like my personal level and my family level of choice. But I'm also an employee of an institution. And what that institution does, I have a end too. And
Hmm.
so like making sure that my sort of I push my institution to be consistent with what I know to be true about the world, right? And the same about our governments, like that our governments, they represent us, right? And they speak for us. And so that's also part of my action, not as an individual, but as a member of this society, as a citizen, that I actually speak to my government officials. They probably get a lot of letters from me. Um, so,
Give them some feedback, right?
I'll
Let
say,
them know how they're doing.
so yeah, but people listen, and those things are
Well,
count,
hey, they always say the
you
squeaky
know.
wheel gets the grease, right?
And
So,
so be
you
squeaky,
gotta speak up.
yeah, be squeaky. And there's also a whole bunch of research that Tom's alluding to in the behavioral change, even just for doing now about talking about climate, it changes the way people think. So
Right.
just like talking about climate in all different contexts and like not forcing it, but just in the moment of thinking about what's relevant in that moment or what you're wondering
Mhm.
about, what you want to learn, those are helpful things to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Can I just add one thing about the last element, the international cooperation element?
yeah.
I think there's the important thing there. I'm very much the local community person. I kind of feel like I've been slowly dragged into larger systems level work and policy work. Um, but I have found value in the international cooperation effort, and so I continue to be in that space. And I sit on a couple of different UN level panels and committees to be able to share across the globe about what's happening and how things should be. And it's amazing what is going on in the world.
Oh,
And
yeah.
still, we actually don't have a good system for sharing how we're learning about it, which is what ACE is, right? And so that is actually the whole series of conversations starting as of today, actually, at the international level that are really trying to expand those conversations. And this next decade is a center of focus for that. So we can be a bright spot in the world to show what can be done. And we can share our learnings that we do locally into that space. As like gifts for the world, and we can learn from others and what they've done. So I think that
Absolutely.
participation is really important.
Better watch out, Deb. You're gonna be like hired to be work on some UN committee here soon. Keep it
She'll
up.
take over the
So,
world.
as far as I can tell, nobody's going to pay me for the next year.
Well, Bill and Melinda Gates might help you out. I
I
don't
know,
know.
right?
Let's see.
Mhm.
Well, okay. So the the big money shot in the book for me was the shoulds.
Mhm.
There's a lot of shoulds that were outlined in the chapter 4 there that kind of really laid out, okay, well, here's the recommendations that
Mhm.
we as a collective group, these climate champions that we spent a lot of time researching and collaborating and discussing and trying to
Yeah.
identify all these. Then you said, hey, this is what we recommend. So let's go through some of those because I think that's hugely important to understand that all the work was kind of being, done to this outcome to come to
Mhm.
deliver this outcome. So
Hmm.
let's talk about that.
Let me say one thing about that going in, and that is that this is not a consensus report. These are not recommendations that everybody who participated agreed on. Instead,
Mhm.
we collected all of the recommendations that people made and included them in here because it's in some ways, it's not a brainstorm because these are validated recommendations based on hard experience over many, many years. And so it means that not everybody who participated would necessarily agree on every single one, but it provides an enormous sort of rich library of actions that the federal government and subnational governments and organizations can undertake to make progress and get rid of some of the obstacles to success.
So I thought I would give an example of one, and like just think about what does that mean from an ACE perspective. And there's so many to choose from, but I thought it might be helpful to take one that's in the workforce, because I think that may be more relevant for your listeners, because they cover all different areas of human activity. So this one's about workers at every level of the economy approach their jobs through a climate solutions lens that integrates sustainability goals into the everyday fabric of the workplace. So if I was my brother, right, working in the shipyard, he'd be like, what? And so like figuring out like, what does that mean for him? Like sitting with a group of shipyard riggers and saying like, what does it mean to think about climate lens, and like doing learning with them in the context of their own community and their own work to think, what does it mean to do that in your area? It's not saying do this. It's saying there is some aspect of your work that is influencing climate positively or negatively.
Yeah, and here's the things that we'd like you to look about. Yeah, here's what we want you to think about and steps to take to, it's interesting you brought that one up. And I just encountered this today, as a matter of fact, with a client that I work with. And, the idea was, well, maybe we should set up a separate call from the type of calls we currently do just to talk about sustainability as it relates to climate, because it's all about carbon capture, carbon emission tracking, because the companies want to go zero net carbon by 2035. And so the work we're doing, it's like, okay, well, let's have a conversation around the sustainability aspects of the work we're doing. And that's starting. I mean, this is a huge.
That's right. Lots of people are doing it already. They're way out in front. And so ideally what ACE will do is ACE will actually find those leaders, right? Like through the networks and surveying, they'll find those leaders already in those spaces and leverage the work they're doing and help them train others in other contexts, similar contexts, to do the same kind of thing. And so it's not about somebody coming from a university necessarily and telling you, like it's about like, how do we actually take people who are doing this work, who are leading it, to actually like connect them and link them with other people who need to be doing it, who are unsure and maybe want to. We hear that a lot, right? Like, well, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. Well, that's the problem. Like, we need to solve that problem, right?
You might remember in the last time I spoke with you, Sean, we were talking about how I decarbonized my design firm.
Yeah, I love
operations, right? Yeah. And I didn't know how to do it any more than anybody else does, but I decided to look at our operations through a climate lens for the first time. And it revealed to me, you might recall the story that I had 2 employees who had moved all the way to Palm Springs and were commuting to Long Beach every day. That's 100 miles through rush hour traffic in the LA basin every day, both ways, right? Yeah, so 200 miles a day. And when I we looked at that through the climate lens, we said, holy cow, what are we doing here? And we had put up with the fatigue and the stress and the overtime that created, because people were losing their lives. And I mean, their quality of their lives was diminished. They were exhausted all the time. And so we said, hey, you guys only come in once a week. We're going to do an experiment and see if we can have you guys work from home and be productive. And it took a couple of months to work out the kinks, And since there was a fabricator who built exhibits for us, but in between their home and our office, we said, let's stop driving to the shop for meetings and driving back and then driving home at the end of the day. Let's have those guys do the shop visits when they're passing by, or we'll have somebody else do it on commuter, it begins or ends their commute each day, right? So that they're not driving so much. We put up with things that we loathed about our business for years. And it makes you feel stupid when you realize you just lived with it. You put on the climate lens, the green lens, and you say, holy cow, there's an opportunity here to solve multiple problems at once. our carbon emissions went way down, our quality of life went way up,
Oh yeah,
right?
right. Yeah,
And
absolutely. Well,
so this is an
don't you
example.
think COVID's helped us with this whole in a
Oh my
society
gosh.
perspective
Oh
Can I
too,
my
right?
say
goodness,
how
yes.
how much has that helped? I've been working remotely for 4 years.
Right.
And so when COVID happened, it was like, okay. And granted, like I don't want to diminish the actual pandemic. It was awful. But
No,
like
it's not good, but
no, but the innovations that we have in like virtual working and hybrid environments, all of that is incredible. And I have to say, like one of the things we've seen a actual disturbing trend in the workforce related to women in the workforce in COVID because of who's in childcare, in control of childcare, and like disruptions and everything else. But going forward and building out of this, the new things that we've learned potentially will offer us benefits in terms of female participation in the workforce because we can be more flexible, like what you're saying, Tom.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, it's much better, you know, life experience now is, you know, working from home. I mean, I enjoy working from home. I think it's been great. I'm saving literally 100 miles a day on my car too, and that time away. And you know, it's you know, you think about that. I was like, okay, I did this for 15 years back and
Mhm.
or more than that, you know, back and forth. It's just, yeah, you just it's been good and it's been an environmental positive. I mean,
Yes.
think about the you know, there's been a positive impact on the environment because of this. Now, not so much on the health side, but
Well, and
um,
it also puts the light back on the environmental justice question because
Mhm.
who's going to work and who's working at home,
yeah,
right? It's not evenly, it's not equitable, it's not evenly distributed,
right.
and the pay for people who have to go out and go to work is generally lower than the people who can stay home and be safer.
Mhm.
So now we see it, and you
Yeah,
have to see things in order to fix them.
Yeah, it's been exposed, right? Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
yeah.
Well, I
People,
think another one of those recommendations that I saw, and we did touch on it a little bit ago, which was you know, funding, continuing funding these types of nonprofit organizations pursuing these types of climate strategies to help
Hmm.
change the hearts and minds of society and younger generations as they come up. I mean, I do think that the younger generation coming up are much more environmentally aware
Mhm.
of these types of challenges that we face compared to say the Gen
Yeah.
Xers and the Gen Zs, right? Or yeah, I
Mhm.
mean the Gen Xers and the baby boomers. I meant to say, sorry.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think there's some really great, and I blame it or like I think it's the benefit of the internet. You know, like I was, as to totally date myself, but I was like um, 19, maybe 18, 19 when I realized there was a thing called the internet. So because it was new. And so
yeah, right.
so you know, I'm thinking about how information is available now in different ways. That the sort of second edge to that issue is, of course, all kinds of information are available right now that are not necessarily verified in any kind of reality. And so, like, more and more, I think what we need is not factoids about what is in the world, because all that's changing very fast. But we need a way for people to really make sense of information. Like we need digital literacy and like critical thinking skills that are going to actually ask us to like interrogate, well, who's doing that and why did they have the authority to speak on that? Or why do I believe them, you know, at the very
Yeah,
base level. And that's the kind of like, you know, it's not going to help me to tell you that climate change is real. It really isn't. Like what I have to do is like ask you where you see changes in your world and why you think they're there, and like follow your train of thought and work with you on that. And so that's the kind of learning that we need. We need learning
Hmm.
in the work that are the things, the communities we care about. Yeah.
no, I like it. I like it. I think that's really good. Well, so what's the path forward? You know,
I want
what's going to
one more
happen
thing
with
on the
these
funding.
community?
Yeah, one more thing on the funding trajectory that you're just saying. So
Yeah,
like um I have to say that the path forward and then like path backward and path in every direction involves like figuring out how to fund coherent and equitable ways for people to participate in this work, because education generally, like learning generally, is massively underfunded. Everybody's been to school. They all think they know everything about learning, but actually designing learning that's collaborative, that's in, like very relevant to what we're doing in any moment, it takes time, and it takes people. And to do it really well, it takes coordination with other people and other organizations who are doing it. So we don't have to like duplicate or like reinvent the wheel, right? And so, yeah, that kind of coordination is something that is just incredibly poorly funded. It's poorly understood. And so the more that we can get people thinking about that, and I think the framework gives us some guidance for that, and a number of other papers and things that we've been writing around this effort, gives us some guidance that why that coherence is important and why that funding that kind of system is important. So yeah, at any and every scale, I must say.
Yeah. Just one example to amplify what Deb's talking about. She and I were talking the other day about the increased urbanization of our population. And there is a lot of evidence that says that kids who grow up with unstructured time in nature tend to be the people who work to preserve the environment, right? What does that mean for the concentrations of people into cities? How do we create education experiences, not just in school, but in people's lives, that create the opportunities to connect with the world outside cities and build the kind of empathy and concern and care that comes naturally to people when they grow up in those environments? That's just one of many issues that this educational coordination function and intentional design function that Deb's talking about needs to address.
Yeah, no, good point. Very good point.
I can see some amazing opportunities in the future where we have like learning in place kind of opportunities in farms, in, forested communities, in all different environments and situations where people actually highlight the work they've done to live sustainably in those spaces. And that's a learning experience for many people who don't live in those kinds of places. And that's like the new ecotourism kind of version, but it could be a really like viable, rich alternative to what's going on now. So,
well, I think there's just the work you guys have done with this this book and the ACE framework, planning framework, has just been great. Very impressed, and kudos to both of you and all the contributors who have spent a lot of time. Right?
No kidding.
Just I know I can't imagine all the time, but there's been a lot. A lot of sleepless nights just waking up thinking about stuff. Oh, your just mind's always going, right? I know. But you guys are doing great things. I really hope that the administration picks up some of you guys to help them frame up the strategy that the U.S. is going to put forth, and whoever the national focal point is, that they really tap into some of you guys. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, we're very hopeful, and
we are.
A big thank you to all of the coordinating team members and all of the people who participated in these dialogues. It was just an amazing experience.
Yeah, we get to be in public hearing people tell us how great it is, but it's not, it's not our work. It belongs to everybody who was involved.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you guys coming on to show. I'm gonna show the book here for the people who haven't seen it.
Yes, we all have one.
Yeah, so make sure we got 3. There we go. Make sure you guys go out and pick up your book off Amazon, or you can go to the resettingourfuture.com website and order a book. And I know Deb and Tom would be greatly appreciative of you doing that and for the work that they've done to put this together. And so thanks for the time, guys. This has been great. I'm looking forward to seeing more good stuff come out of you guys, and we'll stay connected. And you know what? Maybe we'll do another show down the road and just see what's news. What the new outcomes have come out to present themselves.
That'd be terrific, John. Thanks.
Thank you so much
for
having us.
You bet. This has been good. Well, hey, have a great evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right.